right, so this, you should have something that looks like this. Okay, we've got our public class basketball player, like I gave you to start, and then we got our variables and our methods. And again, these can be called different things. They can be called member variables. They're called that because they're variables for each member of the class. So the idea in member methods, because these are the methods that each member of the class has available. But anyway, you've got basically your data, you're storing your variables, and then you've got your methods, which are the actions you can call to change or get those variables. So you should have one variable for the total number of points the players scored. You can call it whatever you want. I called it total points. You could have called it something else, but it should be private. It should be an integer in this case because points, you never have half a point in a basketball game. So this should be an int called total points. And then you have the three methods. One to get access to those total points, in other words, return the total points to another program that wants to get access to them. One to set the total points, if you need to actually set the total number of points that a player has, and one to increase the total points. And they should look like this. The getter should just basically, again, all three of these should be public. The getter should just return the total points. That's all it does. It goes and accesses that variable, gets the value of it, and returns it to whatever object it's being called on. It returns it to the program that's using that object. Okay, so it should be public. It should have an integer return type, and then it should return that. And again, you should call it something like this. Okay, the setter method should also be public. It's void because it's not returning anything. Okay, and it's just setting the total number of points. And in this case, it has to take a parameter. Somebody has to be able to pass in an actual value to set how many points they want that player to have. Okay, and that value in this case is going to be an integer. And you can call it whatever you want here. I called it TP, kind of short for total points. And then what this line of code does, obviously, is it sets the total points variable up here to be equal to whatever argument was passed into this parameter, TP. Okay, so I'm going to stop here real quick and talk a little bit about variable names in these parameters, because what a lot of people end up doing naturally, and this can be a point of confusion, is they say, okay, so I got this variable called total points that I want to actually store the total points for each player, for that particular player. Okay, and then I need to pass in a new value to set that. So a lot of people actually end up, just without thinking about it, they call this variable something like total points as well, without thinking about the fact that total points is already the variable name for the actual total points for that player. This is just an argument being passed in to set that value. And the problem is, if you call this total points, then you come down in your code here and you're saying, all right, I want to set that total points to be equal to this total points. And you end up going like this, and you'll get an error for one. But even if you didn't, total points. Which of these variables is referring to which of those? Is it referring to the actual variable we're storing to keep track of the total points, or is it referring to this parameter that's just being used to pass in a value into this method? So you have to be careful not to name these things, even though they're related concepts, because you're trying to set this to be equal to this. You have to be careful not to name them the same thing. And so some people have taken on little coding conventions where they say, okay, I'm going to call all of my member variables, I'm going to do something like put the letter M in front of it and do something like that. And so all of my variables that are kind of the variables to keep track of these values for the objects, every single one of them, I'm going to do something like that. So if they also had one called name, it would be something like private string M underscore name, something like that. And then anytime you have another variable where you're just passing in an argument or something, you can use the name of that variable but leave off the M. So that's something that people do. Sometimes people do the opposite of that, where they actually do, anytime something like you have a parameter being passed in, you could do something like this, P underscore, or something like that to mean this is just a parameter variable. And then you would actually say, change that there, okay, to match that. Okay, you can choose different conventions if you want. What I'm going to do is just tell you to just make sure you don't use the same names. And so even though this represents the total points getting passed in, I'm just going to call this TP and set this equal to TP. And then it's obvious that this total points is not the same thing as this variable, even though really we're using this variable to set that. So anyway, just be very careful about that, your parameter names versus the names of your member variables that you're using to keep track of the actual value in the object. Okay, so you would have something like this, okay, where this is the total points that you're trying to set, and this is the parameter that's being passed in that you want to set it to. So this value gets assigned to the total points. Okay, and then increased total points should look something like this. Okay, again, it's public. All of our methods for now we're making public. It's void, which means it doesn't return anything. It's just setting something, okay, or it's mutating something. It's changing the value of total points. And then we have to call whatever name we want to give the method. We have a parameter that gets passed in. Okay, you can call this whatever you want. I called it points scored. That's how much we're going to increase the total points by. And then again, this actually increases total points by that value of points scored that got passed in. Or again, total points here, here, and here is referring to that member variable up there, which is going to have the value of total points for a particular basketball player. So, with all of that said, what I want you to do next is take this class that I gave you. You can use your own code, or you can use the code. Maybe just use the code that I've given you, so we can be on the same page with what we do next. And I want you to write a program that does a couple of things. So I want you to write a separate class. I called it Basketball Manager Program. You can call it whatever you want. That creates a couple of basketball player objects, sets their total points. Let's say that say we're partway through the season, and we just set the total points they have for that season, and then increases the total points. Okay, so they've played a couple of games. They play a couple games where they're going to have a couple increases, and then prints out their total points at the end of the couple of games using get total points. So let me come over here and see if I can write this down. So we're going to make a new game, or a new file called basketball program. What did I call it? You can call it whatever you want, but I called it Basketball Manager Program. Okay, so it's going to have a main method in it. Inside of that main method, I want you to create two basketball player objects. Given that code that I just showed you, I want you to increase the number of points. So say that they play a couple games. So you need to use the increase points method. So pick an amount they score in each game. So let's say that player 1 up here has 1,000 points. Okay, we create a basketball player and we set, oh, I didn't say that, sorry. After you create the two basketball player objects, then you need to set their total points. Okay, so let's say that we created one basketball player and we set total points to 1,000. Okay, then again, have them play a couple games, in other words, call their increase points method. So we're going to actually call increase points, and maybe player 1 scores 20 points in the first game. So we're going to do an increase points of 20, and then I want you to print out the total points they have after that. So if player 1 had 1,000 points to begin with, and he plays one game, and we say increase points 20, and then he plays another game, and we say increase points by 30, something like that, then when you print out the total points, player 1 is going to have 50 total points. So see if you can write the code to do that. So this is in a totally different file. Okay. By the way, that file needs to be in the same directory or the same folder as the basketball player class that we've already created. But anyway, create a brand new file called basketball program manager.java or something like that. Write a main method and actually write the code to do this. Create a couple basketball player objects, increase their points a couple times, simulating a couple games they've played, and then print out their total points. And I'll jump back here and I'll leave it on this screen. So you can pause the video, use this, and see if you can do that.